know that feeling when you finish a sandwich and 20 minutes later you feel like you need a nap? Not sleepy the way a good meal makes you sleepy. The other kind. That heavy, foggy, can't keep your eyes open kind that creeps up on you right around 2 in the afternoon and makes you wonder if something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. Something is wrong with the bread, and I don't say that to scare you or to sell you anything. I say it because a friend of mine, a woman named Nancy, one of the kindest people I have ever known, figured this out the hard way about 30 years ago, and what she learned changed the way I bake bread for the rest of my life. I was there for most of it. I watched it happen, and today I am going to tell you the whole story and give you the recipe that came out of it, because you deserve to know. My name is Rosalie Jean. I have been baking bread at home for over 50 years. Not in a bakery, not in a cooking school, in my own kitchen, with my own hands, the way my mother taught me and the way her mother taught her. I am not a nutritionist, and I am not a doctor, and I want to be clear about that from the start. What I am is someone who has watched this bread do quiet, steady good for people I love over the course of several decades, and that counts for something. The bread I am going to teach you today is a Greek village bread. Horiatiko Psomi, they call it. It is nothing fancy. It is the kind of bread that Greek families have made in their homes for generations. Rough, honest, with a crust that crackles when you cut it, and a crumb that is dense enough to actually hold you. No additives, no preservatives, no mystery. Just flour, water, yeast, a little olive oil, and thyme. And that last ingredient, thyme, is the one that makes all the difference. I will explain exactly why in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you about Nancy's mother, because that story is really where this bread begins, at least for me. Nancy and I met in our 30s, when our children were small and we were both the kind of tired that only mothers of small children understand. She lived 2 streets over. We used to walk together in the mornings before the day got away from us. She was Greek on her father's side, born here, but her grandmother had come over from a village outside Thessaloniki, and that connection to the old country was something Nancy carried with her, the way some people carry a photograph. Quietly, but always. Her mother, I will call her Yaya, because that is what the grandchildren called her, which is simply the Greek word for grandmother. Her mother had come to visit one summer, and the visit stretched into several months, the way visits from mothers sometimes do. Yaya had been told by her doctor back home that her cholesterol was too high and her blood sugar was not where it needed to be. She was not diabetic, but she was heading somewhere her doctor did not want her to go, and the advice she had been given was the usual kind: eat less, eat differently, watch yourself. What Yaya watched, mostly, was the bread on Nancy's kitchen counter. American sandwich bread. Soft, white, sweet-smelling, the kind that comes in a plastic bag and stays soft for 2 weeks without going stale. And she would not touch it. Not because she was difficult, because she had grown up eating something completely different, and her body knew the difference even if she did not have the words to explain it. She asked Nancy to help her make the bread she had grown up with, the village bread. And Nancy called me and said, "Rosalie, will you come over? I have no idea how to do this, and Mama wants bread." So I went, and the 3 of us spent an afternoon in Nancy's kitchen, Yaya directing in a mix of Greek and English, Nancy translating and guessing, me doing what I always do in a kitchen, which is put my hands in the dough and figure out what it needs. That bread came out of the oven at about 5 in the evening, and I have been making a version of it ever since. I will tell you why it matters, really why it matters, down to the way it works in your body, and then I will walk you through every step of making it. By the time you are done reading this, you will have everything you need to bake a loaf this week. And I promise you, the first time you eat a slice of this and notice that you are not tired afterward, not foggy, not reaching for something sweet an hour later, you will understand why Yaya would not touch that plastic bag bread. Stick with me to the end because I am also going to share one small addition to this recipe, something Yaya added that Nancy and I thought was strange at the time, that turns out to make a very real difference in the texture of the crust. It is not what you would guess. Why this bread is different and why it matters for your blood sugar. Let me explain one thing plainly, and then we can get into the actual baking. When you eat bread, your body breaks down the carbohydrates in that bread into sugar and releases it into your bloodstream. How fast that happens depends almost entirely on two things: the structure of the bread and how long the dough was fermented before it was baked. Most commercial bread and most quick homemade bread is made with fast-acting yeast and a short rise, an hour, maybe two. That is enough time for the dough to puff up and look ready, but what it does not give you is fermentation, real fermentation, the slow kind, where the yeast and the naturally occurring bacteria in the dough have time to start breaking down some of the starch and the gluten before you ever put the bread in the oven. When that pre-digestion happens, and that is really what slow fermentation is, a kind of gentle pre-digestion, the bread that comes out on the other end is structurally different. The starches are partially broken down, the gluten is more developed and easier for your body to process. And the result is a bread that releases its energy more slowly after you eat it, rather than all at once. This is the bread that Greek village families have been eating for centuries, not because they knew the science, because they knew the taste. Long fermented bread tastes better. It has more complexity, more depth, a slight tang that is not quite sourdough, but is heading in that direction. Yaya's bread, the bread we made that afternoon in Nancy's kitchen, sat overnight before it was baked. 10 hours, 12, sometimes more. That is the secret. That is the whole thing, really. The rest is technique. And technique is what I am here to teach you. Here is the one sentence I want you to remember. Slow bread is gentle bread. Say that to yourself the next time you are tempted to rush the rise. Slow bread is gentle bread. The hours you give the dough are hours your body will thank you for later. I am going to walk you through this in 5 parts. Take your time with each one. This is not a bread you rush. The first thing, start with the right flour and respect the water temperature. This bread is made with bread flour, not all-purpose. Bread flour. The difference between bread flour and all-purpose flour is protein content, and in this recipe, that difference matters. Bread flour has more protein, somewhere around 12 to 13%, compared to about 10 or 11% in all-purpose. More protein means more gluten. More gluten means a stronger structure, a better chew, and a loaf that holds its shape when it comes out of the oven instead of spreading out flat like a pancake. If you only have all-purpose flour in your pantry right now, you can use it. The bread will still be good, but it will be softer and a little more fragile, and the crumb will not have that dense, satisfying texture that makes this bread what it is. If you are going to make this recipe your regular rotation, and I hope you will, it is worth keeping a bag of bread flour on the shelf. For this recipe, you will use 1 kilogram of bread flour. Say that in your head as about 2 1/4 pounds, or just over 7 1/2 cups, lightly scooped. This makes 2 loaves, which is exactly right because this bread keeps well and you will want it around. Now, the water. You need 630 milliliters of lukewarm water. If milliliters do not mean much to you in the kitchen, Think of it as just over 2.5 cups. The temperature of that water matters enormously. Too cold and your yeast will not wake up properly. Too hot and you will kill it before it has a chance to do anything. Lukewarm means it should feel comfortable on the inside of your wrist. Warmer than cool, but not hot. If you have a kitchen thermometer, you are looking for somewhere between 105 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. If you do not have a thermometer, use your wrist. Your body knows warm. I learned this the way everyone learns it, by killing a batch of yeast with water that was too hot and wondering why my dough never rose. My mother used to say, the water should feel like bath water for a baby. Not your bath water, a baby's, that is warm enough to be comfortable and not a degree warmer. Here is where most people go wrong with yeast breads. They do not check their water temperature. They run it from the tap, it feels fine to their hand, and they pour it in. But hands are less sensitive than wrists, and what feels fine to your hand might be 10 degrees hotter than what your yeast can survive. Use your wrist, every time. The second thing, the overnight rise, and why you must not skip it. This is the heart of the recipe. Everything else is technique. This is the thing that makes the bread what it is. Once your dough is mixed, and I will give you the full mixing method in a moment, you are going to cover it and leave it alone. Not for an hour, not for 2. You are going to leave it at room temperature for somewhere between 10 and 12 hours. Overnight, in other words. Mix it in the evening, go to sleep, come back to it in the morning. I know that feels like a long time. Nancy felt the same way when Yaya told her. She said, "Mama, 10 hours?" And Yaya said, "Yes, 10 hours." And then she said something in Greek that Nancy translated for me as roughly, "The bread knows what it is doing, leave it alone." I have thought about that sentence a lot over the years. The bread knows what it is doing. And in a very real way, it does. During that long, slow rise, the yeast is eating the sugars in the flour and producing carbon dioxide. That is what makes the dough puff up. But alongside that, natural bacteria in the dough are producing lactic and acetic acids, the same acids you find in sourdough. Those acids are part of what gives this bread its depth of flavor and its slight complexity. They are also part of what makes the bread gentler on your blood sugar, that partial breakdown of starch we talked about earlier. You cannot get there in 2 hours. You simply cannot. The chemistry does not work that fast. 10 hours gives you something that 2 hours cannot, and the difference is not subtle. It is the difference between bread that tastes like bread and bread that tastes like something. The honest caveat I want to give you here is this. If your kitchen is very warm, over about 75 or 76 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, a 10-hour rise might be too long, and your dough can over-ferment. It will smell strongly sour and may collapse on itself. If your kitchen runs warm, check the dough at 8 hours. If it has more than doubled and smells very sharp, shape it and get it in the oven. The bread will still be good, just slightly more sour than intended. On a cool or average temperature day, 10 to 12 hours is exactly right. The third thing, the yeast, fresh versus dried, and what the sugar is actually doing. This recipe traditionally uses fresh yeast, 25 grams of it, which is a small amount, just under 1 ounce. Fresh yeast looks like a soft, crumbly cake. You can find it in some grocery stores, usually in the dairy or refrigerated section near the butter. It is not always easy to find, and I understand that. If you cannot find fresh yeast, use instant dried yeast, but use only 1/3 of the amount the recipe calls for, 1/3. So if the recipe says 25 grams of fresh yeast, you use roughly 8 grams of dried, a little under 2.5 teaspoons. Fresh yeast is more alive and active, which is part of why the long, slow rise with fresh yeast produces such a good result. Dried yeast works, but it is not quite the same. That is the honest truth. You dissolve the yeast in your lukewarm water with 1 teaspoon of sugar. And I want to explain what that sugar is doing, because I know some of you are going to look at it and think, wait, I thought this was the healthy bread. What is sugar doing in here? The sugar is not in the bread. The sugar is food for the yeast. Yeast is a living organism. It needs something to eat to wake up and get active. The teaspoon of sugar you add at the start gives it an immediate food source so it can activate quickly and get to work. But here is what happens to that sugar over the course of a 10-hour rise. The yeast eats it, almost all of it. By the time your dough goes into the oven, the sugar that was there to feed the yeast has been consumed by the yeast. What is left in the finished bread is a trace, almost nothing. So you are not eating a sugary bread. You are eating bread that was fermented with the help of a small amount of sugar that is largely gone by the time the loaf comes out. This is one of the things Yaya tried to explain that afternoon in Nancy's kitchen, and neither of us quite understood it at the time. We understood it later, after we had been making this bread for a few years and watching how differently it sat in the stomach compared to quick-rise bread. The body does not lie about these things, not over time. You let the yeast, water, and sugar sit together for about 5 to 10 minutes before you add anything else. You will know the yeast is alive and active when the mixture starts to look foamy on the surface. Small bubbles, a slight puffiness, that is the yeast waking up. If after 10 minutes there is nothing happening, no foam, no bubbles, your yeast is dead and you need to start again with fresh yeast and fresh water. Do not add dead yeast to your flour. You will mix and knead and wait and end up with a flat, dense brick and wonder where you went wrong. The foam tells you everything. Wait for the foam. The fourth thing, the olive oil, the salt, and how to bring the dough together. Once your yeast is foamy and active, you start building the dough. Add half the flour, roughly 3 3/4 cups, a little at a time, mixing with a spoon or your hand as you go. Not all at once. A little at a time, letting each addition absorb before you add the next. This is not strictly necessary in the way that temperature is necessary, but it gives you more control over the consistency of the dough, and it means you are less likely to end up with dry pockets of flour that never quite hydrate. Then add the olive oil and the salt. 2 tablespoons of good olive oil. 1 1/2 tablespoons of salt. The olive oil is not an afterthought. In this bread, in Greek baking in general, the olive oil does something specific. It tenderizes the crumbs slightly, adds a very faint richness to the flavor, and, this is the part that matters for our purposes, contributes to the bread's nutritional profile. Olive oil is the fat that the Mediterranean diet has built its reputation on for a reason. It is not a neutral ingredient in this bread. It is a meaningful one. Add the rest of the flour now, the remaining 3 3/4 cups, and mix until all the flour has been absorbed and the dough is shaggy and sticky. Sticky on your hands is right. If the dough is smooth and pulls cleanly away from everything, you have either added too much flour or your water measurement was off. This dough should stick a little. That stickiness is moisture, and moisture is what gives you an open, tender crumb. Now knead. Just enough to bring the dough together into a smooth ball, about 3 minutes. You are not kneading aggressively here, not developing a lot of strength in the dough. You are just unifying it. The long fermentation will do the rest of the work for you. The gluten will develop slowly over those 10 hours in ways that 3 minutes of kneading can only begin. Form the dough into a rough ball, place it in a lightly oiled bowl, cover it tightly with cling film or a damp cloth, and leave it. 10 to 12 hours. Do not peak every hour. Do not worry. The bread knows what it is doing. The fifth thing, shaping, the Semolina Secret, and baking it right. This is what Yaya added that Nancy and I thought was strange. When the dough has risen, it will have roughly doubled, maybe a little more, and it will look puffy and alive and smell faintly yeasty and complex. You turn it out onto your work surface and deflate it gently. Not violently, gently. Press the air out with your hands, fold it over itself once or twice. Now divide it into 2 equal pieces with a sharp knife. 2 loaves from 1 batch. Yaya told us to sprinkle the work surface with semolina before we began shaping, not flour. Semolina, that fine yellow durum wheat flour that you usually see in pasta. Nancy and I looked at each other over Yaya's head, and I think we both thought, that seems odd. It is not odd, it is brilliant. Semolina does not absorb into the dough the way flour does. It stays on the surface, between the dough and the work surface, and it creates a very fine sandy texture on the outside of the loaf that crisps up in the oven in a way that flour simply does not. 2 or 3 tablespoons sprinkled on the work surface and another sprinkle directly on the dough as you knead each piece for about 3 minutes, just until smooth. Then shape each piece into a round loaf, a boule, bakers call it, though Yaya just called it a ball, and place each one in a casserole dish or a clay pot with a lid. If you have a Dutch oven, that is perfect. The lid is not optional. The lid is what makes the crust. Score the top of each loaf with a sharp knife, 1 or 2 cuts about ½ an inch deep. This lets the bread expand in the oven rather than bursting in a direction you did not choose. Preheat your oven to 480 degrees Fahrenheit. As hot as most home ovens will go, bake the bread with the lid on for 20 minutes, then remove the lid and bake for another 15 minutes, or until the crust is deeply golden and the loaf sounds hollow when you tap the bottom. That 2-stage baking is the other secret. The lid traps the steam that comes off the dough in the first 20 minutes of baking, and that steam is what creates the crackly, shattering crust. Without the lid, the surface dries out too quickly, and you get a thick, tough crust instead of a thin, crisp one. This is how bread was baked in wood-burning village ovens for generations, sealed in earthenware full of steam. The Dutch oven is just our modern version of the same thing. Let the loaves cool for at least 30 minutes before you cut them. I know how hard that is. But cutting a hot loaf compresses the crumb and you will end up with gummy slices. 30 minutes. Set a timer if you have to. A kilogram of bread flour costs somewhere around $2.50 to $3, depending on where you shop. The olive oil, the yeast, the salt, call it another $1 altogether. You are making 2 loaves of bread for somewhere around $3.50 to $4 total. Each loaf comes out to less than $2. A comparable loaf of artisan bread at a bakery, a real one, with a crust and a crumb like this, costs somewhere between $7 and $12, depending on your city. You are baking $7 worth of bread for under $2, 2 loaves of it, for the week. But more than the money, and I mean this, you are eating bread that has 0 cholesterol. 0. That has no preservatives, no dough conditioners, no high fructose corn syrup hiding in the ingredient list. You are eating bread made the way bread was made before the industrial bakery decided it needed to last 3 weeks on a shelf. Nancy's mother ate this bread every day for the rest of that summer. She walked every morning, she ate simply, and she ate this bread. When she went back home, her numbers had improved. I am not telling you this bread is medicine. I am not a doctor, and this is not a medical claim. What I am telling you is that Yaya knew something and she was not willing to give it up for the sake of a softer loaf in a plastic bag, and I think she was right. Your homework for this week. I want you to try this recipe exactly as I have described it. Exactly. Mix the dough tonight before you go to bed. Leave it overnight. Bake it in the morning. Do not change the flour. Do not skip the semolina. Do not rush the rise. And then tell me in the comments below how you felt after eating a slice. Not an hour later, just how you felt. Was there a difference? Did you notice anything? I am genuinely curious because in all the years I have been making this bread and sharing it with people, the thing they almost always come back to is not the taste, though the taste is wonderful. It is how they felt afterward, like the bread sat quietly, like it did not demand anything from them. I read every single comment that comes through here, every one. So please, leave me a note below. And if your family has a bread from another place, a recipe that came over with somebody's grandmother, or that gets made only at holidays, I would love to hear about that too. Those stories are precious, and they deserve to be told. Next week, I am going to share something I have been sitting on for a little while, a bread that most people think is complicated and expensive and fussy, and it is none of those things. I am going to show you how to make it at home for a fraction of what you would pay, and I think it is going to surprise you. Be here for that one. Until then, keep your oven honest, keep your hands in the dough, and always, always give your bread the time it's asking for, dear.